Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Hard to sit here on such a nice evening, and we have had so few of them.
That's good
I'm
news.
I'm growing webs between my toes, but it's delightful to be here because you have some good news,
Yes.
and we have a presentation that's important for us to understand and absorb properly from the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission. And some good news about the grant, step by step. So let's begin. Call the meeting to order. We have minutes from the meeting of May 31st to review and approve or amend as we see fit. I'll accept a motion to approve. Do I hear? So moved. And second? Seconded. Any discussion, comments, changes? Does it reflect your understanding of what happened? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Any abstentions? One abstention, so it still passes. Thank you. It was requested, and I think quite appropriately at one of our last meetings, that in the beginning of our meetings, we get a quick update on what's happening with current housing development projects in our town. And so luckily we have Adam Ricker here to fill us in and give us a review. Can you give us a quick update, Adam?
Sure. Not much to update on Twin Pines. As far as I'm aware, they're still waiting for their financing approval from the low-income housing tax credit program. Those have not been awarded for any projects that I'm aware of yet, so I think they're just still in the review period. 406 Main Street, which is the 5-unit development behind Pella. They are continuing to work with the water precinct to iron out the technical details of the engineering. As recently as today, their engineers were going back and forth to get some of those kinks worked out, but sounds like they have water service for that project. And then last night, the zoning board heard a variance application for Continuum to allow for wells to be utilized for water service in lieu of the public water that's not available. So that was granted. So they really haven't invested money in finding the wells yet because they didn't want to spend the $100,000 that they anticipate that's going to cost until they actually knew that they had the ability and had the variance. So the one condition on approval was that they need to post a notice in a newspaper of general circulation 30 days prior to drilling. That is not a state law. That is just something that a butter brought up and that the zoning board agreed with. So that's not, don't be alarmed if you find out another well has drilled without notice after seeing this notice. That's not typical.
Great. Do you know by any chance if Twin Pines has the financing they need? I know it was a competitive financing package they were seeking, and do you know how where that stands?
As far as I know, they're still just waiting to hear back from that committee.
Yeah. Okay.
And I'm not aware of any of the other projects in the financing round being told yet either. So I don't think that's neither good news or bad news. They're still just waiting. Good.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Yep.
Great. Thank you. We now have on the agenda an exciting opportunity to have our presentation about the regional housing needs assessment from Olivia and Renee from the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission. Olivia is ahead of the housing group, I guess is the way to say. They work on a team basis there, but Olivia has always been my go-to for these kinds of things and has been very, very helpful. They issued a draft. We had some comments. They addressed the draft, revised the draft. And it, as you may have seen when you read the document that I sent to you in link form, it is a magnificent piece of work and very telling, not just in the conclusions, but I would urge you also, believe it or not, to dig deep into the appendices, because there's some amazing data there that goes beyond housing. It goes to demographics and employment and census data that breaks it down in many interesting and important ways. Goes beyond housing for sure. So with that introduction, I'll turn it over to Olivia, and we have the slide, I think, ready to go. Terrific. Olivia and Renee, please.
One of the guessing. Gotta press. Okay, so we can share this. So just to get started, so the regional housing needs assessment is something that we started a couple of years ago. It was funded through ARPA funding. It's one of the few times that the state did provide funding to each of the 9 RPCs to do this update on the assessment. So it was a big deal, allowed for a lot of collaboration across the region, and also aligned with, at the same time, with the state level housing needs assessment. Going to pass around a couple of things as Renee and I talk about a few highlights, but we're going to hit the highlights, but there's a lot in here. There's going to be a binder that has the housing needs assessment. It does not include all of the appendices because it would be multiple hundred pages. So we didn't include all the tables, but we did include the surveys, the fair share, housing production needs data, and one additional one that provides some extra information about intersection with infrastructure and other important aspects that relate to housing. So I'll pass that around. You can peruse while we talk. I'll start this one here. I'm also, as Peter said, you guys have applied for your HOP grant. That's pending. We are working on a couple of 2, and there's a couple of more towns who are also looking to start their HOP grants that we possibly might be working on. So we have a draft from the Hanover collaboration. We did the market analysis part, and they have another consultant who's working on their phase 2 regulatory assessment. So I'm going to pass this around. It's in draft form, but the idea was it uses a lot of the data that's in the RHNA that Peter alluded to. And we wanted to kind of show you what could be done with that data in addition to what's provided in the RHNA. It's a lot of the same topics, but at the town level and looking at the labor market area. So just something to look at while we talk. I'll bring this.
Olivia, just quickly, who is the other consultant that's working with Hanover on that?
It is Opticos.
Oh, Opticos, yeah.
Opticos. So yeah, very exciting work that they're doing with Hanover right now with some parcel level analysis that we're looking forward to hearing about. Probably, do you want to keep going?
We've heard that name before, incidentally. That's Dan Perolic, Missing Middle, wrote the book. He and his wife, Karen, I think. Anyway, that's the Perolic. That's the company they've created, and it's in California and also an office in Chicago now. So that's great.
So as that's getting passed out, I'll just touch on, so the what is the regional housing needs assessment? As Olivia kind of touched on, it's a regular statutory assessment that the RPCs do. This time around, again, the funding was able to be there from the ARPA funds. And this was created by the professional planners, and they did a lot of informed surveys and deep dives from residents, municipalities, developers, real estate agents, and so forth, relevant stakeholders within the kind of housing world and market. And one of the key things to kind of take away from this too is that it's to serve to uncover kind of those housing trends and opportunities. So it's kind of culmination and then coming back and saying, this is what we have thus far, and kind of where can we kind of point the needle, or, oh, I did never realize this piece of information, and have that as an opportunity to address. And again, the greater endeavor is to increase the number of homes that are affordable and appropriate to our region. So that's kind of what it is. And if you want to touch the next slide, the market conditions, as we all know and have talked about numerous times here with you all as well, the market conditions have been skyrocketing. And you know, it's varied over the past 10 years, but we've seen a very steep uptick over the last few years. And this also shows it in the median sales price at the time was $335,000 in our region. And something that was really interesting too was that the survey of the real estate agents that was put out through the RHNA found that 0% of home sales in our region was at or below asking price. Again, probably not too shocking for us. A lot of us, have been talking about this, but just that how high and how like great this has gotten in the market. And then of those realtors, also 80% of them saw accepted offers. We're always over asking price by 20,000 in our region versus 56% statewide. So our region has a great kind of jump in that versus the entire state. And with the market conditions, the other piece that, as I'm sure you're all aware, the statistical update that's happening, it causes the ripple effect, not only in the housing needs, but then also just, the analysis and assessment of the homes in our region and properties and how it's just kind of doing this big ripple effect everywhere.
So going to look at two data metrics. These are actually updated. You'll see it's a little hard to see on the screen here, but those numbers do go out to 2023. So this is the update. These numbers are in the RHNA, but now added for a couple more months and since then. But I think what you're showing right is that uptick, and definitely in the last couple of years during the pandemic, a steeper incline on the home sale price, the median home sale price. And that is continuing, although it is starting to kind of subside a bit. That rate is continuing. I haven't seen that totally drop yet. And so, just the affordability of the median home, this is specific to Merrimack County, is continuing to increase. And so continues to be a concern. And this compares well, if you go to the next slide, with the supply of inventory. Obviously, I think not surprising to you guys, the price and the inventory are very closely tied together. It's a seller's market. 6 months is often considered a balanced market between sellers and buyers, and we've been below 1 month of absorption rate inventory for a little bit now, and continue to remain then there. This is state level. This is from the most recent New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority's snapshot that they put out in March this year. And I haven't heard any changes to these rates. So definitely a serious concern, especially when you're talking about affordability of the units. Next slide, please.
So continuing on that, with the household budget, the RHNA also dove into analysis of the cost burdened households. So the uptick of the sales prices or cost of rent and what that looks like for a household budget is pretty alarming at times when you look at it. So this one's, it might be a little hard for you all to see. I apologize about that. I should have made the graph a little bigger if I could have. I tried to expand it. So again, these prices are rising equals a shift in affordability. So cost burdened is anything that is over 30% of your monthly gross income, right? So for owners, the housing burden over 50% is that first purple kind of chunk that you see there in that first graph, which is 2184. And then housing burden, that's 30% to 50%, meaning 30 to 50% of their income is going to their housing cost, is 3795, that green chunk on the top there. And then for renters, again, the same metrics. The purple is the housing burden over 50%, and then the green, the housing burden 30 to 50%. And the first number on the bottom, the purple, is 1837, and 30 to 50% housing burden is 2376. So again, seeing that what people, kind of what it boils down to, what people are paying per month and how much of a chunk of their gross monthly income is in relation to housing cost. So that includes for home ownership, taxes, insurance, there's a couple others, sorry, I'm blanking on those, but taxes, insurance, there's PMI, there's a couple other things. So 30% is kind of the mark. And then same with renters, it's the rent plus utilities. So rent plus utilities should be on 30%. So, so renters there in that section that are in the 30 to 50% housing burden, their costs are above what their gross monthly income is.
Excuse me, is
yeah.
this for Merrimack County? Is this for our region? Is this for our
This
town? What's
is
the,
regional.
this is in your
Region.
RPC region?
Yes.
Okay.
So that's kind of household budget. And then if you want to slide to the next one, please. Thank you. Transportation, housing cost. One thing that we touched on too is also infrastructure, which will come up a little more later, but transportation in both housing and transportation does affect the cost of living. So that's kind of a piece of it that we want to make sure we kind of take into consideration how far people are traveling, their cars, their repair, the gas, all of that does lend itself to kind of creating that household budget of what it costs to live where they live. And the high housing cost in employment centers can push the workforce housing further away. So thereby causing more longer commute, more cost in gas, vehicle maintenance, repairs, those kind of things. So the centers having the higher rates kind of does impact that push out, if you will, with transportation and housing. So something that's maybe not always thought of simultaneously, but it's a good thing to kind of keep in the mix of things. And then if you go on the next slide, we have our workforce housing. So I think we're all very familiar with the workforce housing statute, and the RHNA looked into this as well and has a whole section on it. Again, we're kind of highlighting and touching on a few pieces. And you guys have done amazing work revising last year. So again, great job. I know there's a lot of hours and review into that to try to get that a little broader. So again, as you all know, it's defined as the affordable renter earning up to 60% of the AMI for family of 3, paying no more than that 30% on rent and utilities. And then a homeowner earning up to 100% of the AMI, family of 4, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. That's what it was, principal. Sorry, I was missing that earlier. And then something I was going to add into here too. So the AMI I looked up for, does anyone know what our Merrimack County AMI is for 2023?
It just changed in April, right?
June, effective July 1st. They updated. So anyone want to take a stab? Be a little interaction here mid presentation.
You're talking about 100% AMI in Merrimack or
What
in
is,
town?
yep, Merrimack County. What is Merrimack County AMI? Which is what everything kind of goes off of for affordability. So when places are looking at HUD, they're looking at the Merrimack County AMI.
But for our workforce housing, we use New London census data, right?
I think it would depend on, so for example, like a HUD, I believe they have to go by county on the HUD level for like the 60 to 80% of AMI. So Twin Pines, for example, 60 to 80% of AMI, their AMI is going to be based off of the county AMI, Merrimack County, because HUD kind of breaks it down by that. So anyone want to take a stab?
93,000.
Okay. Anyone else? Nah? Come on, Amy.
Is this household or individual?
This is the area median income for household
How much
of 4.
Oh.
for ownership or rental?
Ownership.
I'm holding it
110?
93,
83, 93,
93.
93, 110. Okay, going twice, sold 116. Price is Right style. There you go. So 116,000 is the AMI. So then you take for the county. Correct. For the county, which again, workforce housing and HUD is looking at the county rates. And so, yeah, so that's that's kind of significant. So again, if you think of the 60 to 80%, for example, like Twin Pines does, and other affordable workforce housing, that's still pretty, that range of salary is still kind of up there. So it's getting at kind of being that affordable factor. So, and if you want to go to the next slide, please. And so our top industries in our region was addressed as well. And again, so some of the surveys done from our key stakeholders. So healthcare and social assistance. Sure, that's not too surprising. You all have your hospital here and doctor's offices and staff. And then we have our retail trade, higher education, and manufacturing. And manufacturing in our region, it's in like all these nooks and crannies. Sometimes you just don't think of, oh my goodness, there's like a big manufacturing place back here. So I think that's really interesting that's in our top 4. And as we know, with our COVID pandemic, the shortage of workers and how we saw this translate into our housing need to keep things going. And all these things are very on a daily need basis, pretty much, right? You need your healthcare, retail trade, higher education, your school systems, and then manufacturing for creating. And as we all know, we've seen the stop in that. So how that affected and impacted our region for housing. And with that, so our top industries, then we go into our employer survey that was done, again, that the outreach, those key stakeholders. And this is for this one's our region as well. So this is looking at our results indicated that most employers had a range of salaries across their workforce, with a few above 115 and most at or below 50,000. I apologize again. I know your screen is small up there. But we have basically the first section there of kind of blue lines is 0 to 24,999. Second section is 25 to basically 50, 49,999. And then the third section is 50,000 to 74,999. So you'll see the bulk of the blue, that third line in, that's the highest, and that second subsection is for a quarter to half of their employees. And then in the third section, you'll see the two kind of the second and third line there. Those are less than a quarter and a quarter to half of their employees are in those ranges. So that those two are kind of the highlight. 25,000 up to 74,999 is where we saw the most density in salary ranges. So for our region, again, that kind of puts into perspective for Merrimack County AMI of 116, but showing from our employer survey, which I believe we got a lot of responses in New London as well, garnered there. So, but the kind of middle of the ground in the range was between the 25 to 75 range. So again, falling into line there.
Excuse me, so
Yes.
the employer survey was across only those industries that were listed previously?
No, it was open to all employers. And we did do some more targeting to the larger employers.
How many employees do they have to have?
I mean, we had
Says
we had responses for employers in the teens.
Okay, just wondering.
Not as many of those, but we did get most of the larger employers, including those in New London and some of the medium and a
Yeah.
few smaller.
This is the survey that our commission pushed really hard to solicit participation in both the individual level and also the business level. So there's a lot of data in here that's been used for the regional analysis that could be mined for our particular situation if we chose to hire somebody to do that.
And the yard question.
So I'm just beginning to understand when you're talking about Merrimack County's AMI versus the Upper Valley area, there is so little of Merrimack County in that. Do you know what Sullivan County's AMI is?
That's a great question.
Not off the top of our heads.
What about Grafton?
Grafton County, I did look that up. I don't think it was far behind. Grafton County was 115.
Just a quick question. When we talk about these salary ranges, though, I always have to make the conversion from individual income to household income. And there are mathematic ways of doing it. But if you think of a household of four, which we were just talking about at 116,000 a year, if there are two breadwinners, then you cut that number in half just as an average. So you're $55,000 to $60,000 per breadwinner in a two breadwinner household.
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So just looking a little bit more about how from the same survey, how the employers are perceiving the challenges. And I think it's consistent, very strongly in cost, largely seeing that related to the availability of housing. And so just to orient you, the bars on the right are agreement that a certain factor has an impact on their ability to attract a workforce, and the bars on the left reflect low or feelings that it does not impact. Proximity of the workforce, there was less alignment, but still pretty significant feeling that third bar down, 30%, feeling that had a stronger impact, some 40% medium impact. But there also were those who more fell more on low to not impact. And so that's probably going to really vary depending on the type of service, if you're, for example, a daycare provider, proximity might be more important because you need to be able to get to work even if it's a snowy day and there's ice on the roads. And there's a lot of things like that. And there are others that may be able to close on those days, and proximity is more flexible. Moving down the line, quality of the housing, less of a concern, still a concern, but not one of their tops. And the proximity, feeling like they're losing workers because the community doesn't have amenities or doesn't have public transit, was not feeling like it was a huge detractor for employers. So what that felt like to me was, this is a good place, but the stock is not available at the price needed to attract the workers they need. Next slide, please. So we're going to look a little bit at some of the opportunities and in the next slide, barriers to possible solutions to address, to get the homes that the region and New London needs. The opportunity is like, what could this change is, you could attract a needed workforce for longevity that can maintain over many years. It's something that I think resonated with me, that I've heard from others. When even in a person's individual life, they change types of housing. You don't stay in the same type of home throughout your life. For example, when you're young, say in college, in your 20s, late teens, and also when you're in retirement age, there's a lot of people who live in more community settings, congregate settings. And in the middle years, when people maybe have families, are in their prime working years, they tend to have, single family homes or more independent living apartments, less congregate, less close to friends or family possibly. And just that natural change in anybody's life throughout to different types of homes that suit their needs. And so when you're thinking about, and say, workforce for longevity, is thinking having residents be able to follow, a housing stock isn't static. It is able to serve a community and people who flow through life through different needs, and will continue to be able to attract and maintain the people who provide the various types of contributions and quality of life and everything that a community needs to thrive. And again, that provides the quality of life that I think everyone is looking for in a home. It's not just about the home, it's about your neighbors, then spanning out to the community and everything that builds on the ability to have a home and feeling safe and comfortable in what you're able to maintain, and building then that social fabric and reducing the community vulnerabilities. You know, if all of the, you know, when you're thinking about workforce, and not even necessarily workforce, I mean, I think in New Hampshire, you all are volunteers. It's built on a robust volunteer network. Same thing with the workforce. You need a workforce to be able to build into certain roles. Those are all important people within the community to provide housing for. And being able to have them be closer if they want to be, then they will stay and live in the life and feel happy in that happier in that life. That reduces the vulnerability to any sort of risk that the community might face, any challenge, ability to adapt. So, you know, for example, the recent flooding, it's kind of off on a tangent, but having people in your town who know the roads, who know where things have been problems in the past, who have investment to be able to move the town forward and being able to get the funding, get the expertise needed to address the flooding where it's happening, that all still does relate back to housing. We want those, that requires investment and care in our community. And if you have more of that, the stronger your infrastructure and your social communities are going to be. So next slide, please. Oh, can you go back one?
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry. Oh, can you go back one really quick? Thank
There we
you.
go.
So just a few of the barriers, right? If we get to getting housing. Obviously we have geographical limitations, steep slopes, wetlands, don't always want to build in certain areas just from a functional building perspective. You also have infrastructure that may not be possible to get there, but also you want to optimize its life. You want to optimize the funding that you're putting into it. Roads cost money, drainage culverts cost money, you know, fiber costs money, all these things cost money. And then, you know, we're not going to get huge ARPA bills all the time to be able to cover those costs. And so being conscientious about that, land use regulations can be a barrier, something you guys have been working on. I don't think we have to speak too much to that. But it can be a challenge, and it makes the economics harder to meet those, get those homes in. But also the housing market economics in and of itself is a barrier. And that is not functioning perfectly and across the country. And so I don't want to pretend like one thing is going to be able to overcome all of these barriers. We're going to have to be creative and no, unfortunately. And honestly, that's why my only hope is in that social fabric, because I think the only way we're going to be able to achieve those opportunities and get through all these different types of barriers is to care for each other and to find creative solutions on how to make that work, because they're there. It just takes the will and convincing people that it does matter to them, even if they don't see it right away. And so just looking at the employer perspectives on the types of homes, you know, they're open to a variety of housing. You know, obviously workforce isn't the only type of home that we need, but it is you know, we get a lot of input there. Single family homes are still valuable. Multifamilies, those small ones, 2 to 3 units, some over 3 units, but you know, even like a quadplex. Some of these are still fairly small. You think about some of the cluster communities that are happening. They have this single kind of family home kind of ethos feeling. So I don't necessarily see them as separate personally, accessory dwelling units, townhomes. So there's a variety of types, I think, that people are open to and see as solutions, at least at the employer level.
Oh, Olivia and Renee, I am sorry, but we have a full agenda tonight. So if you could sort of aim for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes.
Sure.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we can kind of breeze through some of these ones, but as we touched on a bit, infrastructure was something that was also deep dived into in the RHNA. We have the transportation, drinking water and wastewater, high-speed internet, environmental stewardship, and sustainability. High-speed internet, I think we didn't include too much in the slides here. I think New London, correct me if I'm wrong, but you guys are pretty well set on high-speed internet. There are some other rural towns in our region that is a big kind of push, and also on the employer side. So, and if you want to jump to the next slide, we have our water and sewer. Again, I won't touch too much on this. I know we've talked about this a lot in a lot of meetings. And so, but municipal water and sewer allows for greater density. But again, it's not always the end all be all. Innovative design and techniques are coming out and are available to be used just as well and essential in the kind of scale of improvements.
Renee,
yes.
what is the first column? WWTF? What's that?
Yep. So that is wastewater treatment
Wastewater.
facility.
Okay.
Yep.
Next one.
And the
okay.
next one is the public water supply or community well systems. So you'll see Newberry on there. They don't have like a whole big thing, but they have a community well system. So that's what picked up those numbers. Same with Wilmette. They have a small community well system as well. So that's why they're showing numbers in there too.
We have wastewater, right?
Wastewater, yes.
Oh, it's a shared
They're
system.
shared
Okay, got
though.
it,
That's what
okay.
the asterisk, yeah. So the
Got it.
asterisk is for any shared systems.
Got it.
Because it's hard to divvy that
And
up.
water, we have challenges.
Yes, doesn't
Okay,
have the numbers for the non-hosting town.
got it.
All right, turn jump to the next slide, please. Good.
So we'll touch briefly on this, but I think the idea here is environmental stewardship and sustainability. And I think this is going back to that resilience piece of when we're talking about development, there's the potential for impact, but there's also a need to value the natural resources. And I think that's something that can be really hard in New England because we value the aesthetics of our natural resource, we value their ecosystem services, and we value the recreation economy that it facilitates. And so it can be really hard, but it's also really necessary to be able to find ways to find that balance to maintain those things within a reasonable and balanced way. If you go to the next slide, please. So we really do emphasize the need to think thoughtfully and very carefully about any zoning changes, development. This isn't to say it all has to be clustered in one place, but is to say, if we're going to add new homes, we need to add new homes. How do we do that in a way that is going to have the least impact on these things that we value dearly, also so they can continue to provide the services that we need to function and keep those homes safe. The infrastructure, obviously, we also want infrastructure that we can maintain and also be protected from any threats from overdevelopment or needing more water quality, having to address water quality if it's being threatened from increased runoff or pollutants or et cetera, that can often happen with development. So being proactive and thinking preventatively, but also being willing to accept some kind of give on both sides. It's really hard, but it's worth it. And I think it's really hard right now because there's so much push to move on housing, but we're going to lose it if we can't put it in the right place and we can't get the services in a way that we can maintain. That's one of my biggest concerns moving forward, especially with some things, recent flooding. So next slide, please. I want to make sure we get to the housing production model. I'll try to go through this as quickly as I can to keep on time. So housing, the RHNA did work with a consultant root policy statewide to perform an analysis, a modeling effort to estimate potential housing production needs. This was broken down both on possible needs for owners and for renter-based households according to the two brackets within the workforce housing law statute. So owners above 100% AMI and those below 100% AMI, which are those in blue. Those above is the darker blue, and those below 100% are the lighter blue. And the brackets here, and those are in 5-year increments going out to 2040. And then also renters at the 60%, same above 60% AMI in the darker green and below in the lighter green. And part of what you're seeing here, you can tell that the darker green boxes are a little bit bigger. And part of that is because how the market is working right now is there's a loss of inventory. And so higher income households are going after homes that maybe would have gone to households at a lower income level. And that's bringing the prices up of those homes. And so we need to adjust the market. So there are enough homes in the price point for the right people. So people aren't crunching, people at the median income are not going to, say a Twin Pines housing because that's the only opening in town. Next slide, please.
Olivia, just quickly before you go to next, are these cumulative numbers? So in 2025, it's 81, and 2030, it's 148. So you'd add those numbers together to determine what we would.
No, they are
Personally?
not. They are not additive.
They're not.
Right. You don't add those on top. They already include that.
So by
addition within.
2030, just to interpret it, by 2030, the conclusion was that we should have a total of 148 housing units, but 81 of those were recommended by 2025.
Correct.
That's the right way to understand it. Okay.
Correct. So the methodology, try to walk through this. So the state did an updated projections model in 2020, I want to say. And so that methodology, which was largely based on, historical migration trends and demographic changes, was taken to using headship, the number of people per household that different age groups tend to live in. So depending on the distribution of the age, you might get a different headship. You might have more people in a household or less people in a household. So that just that age affects it. And so we use that headship to estimate the number of homes. Divvied that into renters and owners based on the state level distribution current. There was a vacancy rate adjustment to try to bring up the vacancy rate to a recommended, which was 5% for renters and 2% for owners. This does not fully address the current deficit, right? This is based on population projections. It's not fully addressing the current deficit of homes, but there was some attempt to address the vacancy to get the market to a healthy vacancy rate. That need is distributed evenly across the 4 years. So that full adjustment is not in the 2025 number. It's evenly distributed across each 5 years because it assumes that the market needs time to be able to build each of those additional units. The other part is so it takes that raw number for each community, and then there is some redistribution based on a labor market area. And so depending on the number of each community is identified within a labor market area. And so what that labor market area represents a certain amount of jobs proportional to the state. And so you get that LMA has to provide that percentage of households based on the number of workers for the LMA. And then within that, each community has a population. And so each community gets a certain number of households based on that portion of the LMA. They don't necessarily have to host all of those jobs that are representing, but if they have a population. So it was an attempt to make sure the distribution was happening to communities that were providing workers, housing workers for employment hubs, but that wasn't always shown through actual employment numbers within the town itself. And so it actually results in a slight reduction for a town like New London and a slight increase for a town like Wilmot. Because you're in the same labor market area. And so you can see your labor market here. New London is the larger community there. And so of your portion of the employment was then distributed by population across all those towns. Next slide, please. The models do have limitations, and you do have to accommodate a degree of flexibility and preparedness. These are different from the Keys to the Valley numbers. If you are familiar with those numbers, they are lower. But they do, I would say, represent the same trend. So for me, it doesn't make a huge difference in the response because the trend is still the same. So when you're thinking of things, some of the things this model doesn't take into account are things like the current deficit of homes, that vacancy rate, but not all of the current deficit. Likely the rentable and affordable units are an undercount. It doesn't include homes that need repair. It doesn't include seasonal homes. It doesn't include group quarters, student population. It does not consider the role of a bedroom community to other LMAs. For example, New London hosts many workers who are remote workers or work in Concord or in Lebanon who are outside of this labor market area. It doesn't identify the need for homes with supportive services, which have been indicated by providers as severely in need across a number of populations. And it doesn't consider newer migration trends in terms of the pandemic, the shift of remote work, or people coming from California or Texas in relation to climate migration. It's been in the news a lot. These are new trends that you can't put into a model yet. And it doesn't consider New London as a place of opportunity. Has good schools, amenities, hospital proximity. These are all things that tend to provide positive life outcomes. And that was not considered as part of the modeling either. Next slide, please.
Okay, so rounding down, so some tools also that came out of this, well, not out of this, but that's available from the New Hampshire Housing Toolbox series from OPD to kind of help tackle some of these maybe land use regulations, things that kind of can be looked at. So that is an opportunity for some learning series. If you're interested, they're doing them on Thursday afternoons, but if you pre-record, they are recorded. So you can go back if there is some ones that wanted to be touched on. And the website for this also has immense information as well, if you just want to read through and peruse it. But again, there are trainings or kind of webinars that are reviewing it, and some good things have come out of those as well. So if you just want to take like a little bit and listen to one of those, I'm sure you can glean some information off of that. And then I think the next slide.
So quickly, we did want to mention the housing utility work. This was one of the recommendations out of the Keys to the Valley and was continued in RHNA. I believe it's been discussed at your planning board and select board meetings because we are looking for letters of support and possible financial contributions from communities to support moving this tool forward. Some of you might have seen one of the aspects of this was a Home Creators Expo that happened in Hartford this spring. We brought, well, actually not we, but our partners, Vital Communities and mostly Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, put together a group of contractors for kind of a fair for people who are interested in putting ADUs or duplexes or other types of smaller homes on existing lots, mostly homeowners, residents. So we're looking to pretty much try to support advancing more homes that allow for home residential developers, non-professional developers to be able to add units on their homes, things that fit within the character of our communities, and also keep that investment and financial benefit within our communities. So we're working on some additional phases, a full-time staff for a pilot program and some business business plan development to try to see if we can build some more support to get those types of units growing. Next slide, please. And
Great.
that's it from us.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. It stirs a lot of questions, and of course, the report has been forwarded to the commission to flip through and understand. Are there any questions that we have of our presenters? No? Pretty clear? I guess I would direct you, when you have a chance, to look at table 5-1 in the study. Don't do it now because it takes a while to find it, but that will show the housing needs assessment conclusion and the fair share allocation. And that shows in 2025, it's distributed over the different AMI percentages and renters and owners, but the total is 81 by 2025 and 148 by 2030. Okay. Any other thoughts, questions? Terrific. Yes.
Rewind and start that again. I think I misunderstood what you were saying.
Can you go to the slide, housing production targets? It's a little hard to see, but that's the slide it relates to that I was talking about. And if you look down on the left-hand side, it describes the numbers by each type: renters above 60% AMI, renters below 60% AMI. Those are the different color bands, correct? And then owners above 100%, owners below 100%. Those are the different bands that you're seeing in green, lighter green, dark blue, and light blue. So I was only referring to the total just in simplicity to point out the fact that by 2025, it's been calculated the fair share for us is 81 units. And by 2030, 148 units, 81 of which should have been accomplished by 2025. So 50, 60, so 67 more units by 2030 is what it is. 67 would be the difference between 81 and 148. And then it goes on from there. Of course, it gets harder and harder to predict, but in 2035, the total is 194. And then in 2040, it's a long time away, 219 units. So you don't add those numbers together, right? You with me? That's important to point out. Any other questions?
But did I hear that this study understates some of the conclusions from other studies? This is more conservative.
This uses up, the modeling actually is pretty similar. This is using updated numbers for population and has the employment aspect to it. So I would say generally, among planners and among many employers in the region, there's a feeling that it's an undercount.
And in one area in particular, this is what I drilled in on, Randy, when we saw the draft. And in one area in particular is it doesn't really count the deficit that we have today. It's only looking out with future population and future labor demand, what's going to be needed there. It doesn't talk about the problem we have today. They did some of it. It also takes a different approach, to my knowledge. I'm not somebody who does these studies, but it started out by saying, okay, the New Hampshire state needs this many units broken down by owners, renters, cohorts, et cetera. And then they went about trying to figure out how to allocate that to the different towns. And they did it on the basis of how much their population grew and will be growing, which ours isn't growing very much at all. And also what our employers' demands are. And so it turns out that if you take that approach, the numbers are lower, as well as the fact that doesn't really dive into the deficit that we have today. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and I mean, it's interesting because if you compare it to the Keys to the Valley number, region-wide, it's actually about the same, but New London's is much lower, and it's a lot of part of that is driven because of those population projections have shown they're smaller than they were when the Keys to the Valley number was done.
Which incidentally is why it's really important that we study demographics, because to the extent we have a problem, it's driven by people, and we need to understand what our people demands are, in my mind.
Does this mean that those numbers are pretty much going to stay the same, even if there's a population difference? In other words, you got to do this. Like you got to at least meet this, or
These,
you're going to be behind the 8 ball, or you might be fair to middling.
these are intended for planning purposes. These are, not gonna, you can't really use these in court. If you say had a dispute around the workforce housing law with a developer, these aren't meant to be used within that realm. I would say that, I think people think that these are the targets. I hope that we could at least meet these.
Meet them.
And I think possibly exceed them would potentially be positive. We definitely encourage communities to look at your town level. These are at the regional level, but there, as Peter alluded to, there's a deficit to consider. There are other aspects that you might have town level data or information or input, more input from employers that might bring some of this a little bit more to life about what New London needs to do. If you feel like knowing a little bit more about targets would be helpful. I think there are ways you can pull in more town level data to get a better look at that. At the same time, I think the trend will probably stay the same, although the exact target might vary depending on opinion, right? Because data is still going to be data, and especially with models, it's always up for debate. So getting at the human level is where the heart of still where we need to go. Thank you.
Any other questions? Very enlightening. Thank you very much. I'm going to send a set of the slides around to the commission after this meeting, so they'll have them to look at, because that will be helpful. And also a few of the tables that come from the report itself as to the numbers we've just been talking about. But thank you. You're welcome to stay if you'd like, but you don't need to. I know you're busy and your time is pressed as well, Olivia and Renee. So I don't feel you need to compelled to stay. If you'd like to be excused, please. And with our gratitude, thank you. This is very helpful.
Thank you for having us. Sure. Do you want to hold on to him? Or sure. Sure.
Can we send them back to you?
I can grab them, yeah.
Okay. Terrific. Thank you. Great. Let's move on to another very important piece we've been preparing for, which is a discussion about our strategic plan, what we want to accomplish going forward. There have been thoughts that have been gathered from different boards and town staff and interviews that have been very helpful and enlightening. I summarized them in a piece that we handed out before. And they were also, just to remind you, many or most of those ideas were incorporated in the matrix of tasks that we would possibly accomplish as part of the grant application that we filed. We're successful at getting in time. And I'm pleased to report that we heard just this afternoon, I gave you a copy of the email from Alyssa Del Tufo that it says, I'm pleased to inform you that New London's HOP application is conditionally approved with a few changes requested by the steering committee made prior to full approval. I also queried Alyssa to confirm the fact that any even final approval was subject to additional funding that New Hampshire Housing Finance would be getting. Remember, I mentioned before that their HOP program funds had been fully expended, even though they haven't really finished the program yet. It was very popular and we didn't file earlier. So if we achieve final approval, and it looks like we have a very good chance of that, we will be in a position to receive funds provided the additional funds are made available to New Hampshire Housing Finance from the legislature. We heard earlier from Steve Whitman here at our last meeting that those funds actually have been allocated in the state budget. So subject to the vagaries of what happens in the legislative process and disbursement, everybody's cautiously optimistic. So we have 7 business days to adjust our application, which I will work on promptly with further guidance from New Hampshire Housing Finance, but we're cautiously optimistic. So for this meeting, what I did was to consolidate a lot of the information we've been looking at before into a single page, which has got a big draft stamp across the front of it. You received that earlier. And what I did was I boiled the goals down at the very top, so we're not looking at too much text. And I didn't put them in any particular order, but just trying to group them into single lines. And then in this next section on that page, talked about the purpose of these goals. Sort of the first being New London existing conditions. Who are we? And then what are the problems and trends that we're facing? Where is the problem occurring? And then possible solutions and opportunities. And then points out that the support we would hope to have would be from the town's staff and the budget we have, which is $15,000. And then the Navigator grant, which we're going after. Support from Colby Sawyer College would be facilities and curriculum integration. I wouldn't think they would be able to make funds for us, but just having their facility support and perhaps some integration with the curriculum could give us a terrific win in our sales. So it's not just the Housing Commission, but it's with an academic institution that is supporting it. So that's the piece really we I think is a starting point for our discussion.
Peter, what does that mean?
Well, I was trying to keep it in shorthand. I met with Steve Thoreau and I met with Sue Stubner about 2 months ago and said, if we were going to plan a program, an educational series, a community engagement program that helps to study who we are, what we do, where we need housing, where it could go, how could that fit in with your curriculum? And there are a number of, if you look at their handbook or their guidebook as to how they put their courses together and what the course requirements are, there are a number of ways that what we're considering doing could touch in different cores of what they do, like social studies and economics and geography and so you could envision, without stretching your imagination too far, that a professor might say to the class, there's a program going on in next week by the Housing Commission studying the demographics of the town. And for you social study folks, we recommend that you attend. Or we recommend that you attend and we'd like you to do a paper on how you think that works in other towns or, so using that as a rich resource. Again, that's the vision. It's not necessary, but as I thought about it and it seemed that President Stubner seemed interested. She of course needed to have the support of her faculty, which and we would, once we come up with some ideas that are concrete, we would provide her bullet point summary of some of the ways we might work together. And that was, so the ball is in our court to get back to her when we've baked our thoughts, if we think it's a good idea. But she seems supportive. And I think the notion of having it in that Wheeler Hall it really is a terrific environment for us to be promoting these kinds of discussions. Just one person's opinion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Would that include student work?
You mean working with the commission?
Well, engaging the support of the students. If you're in a class and the teacher says, whatever, maybe they're doing a paper, maybe they're doing a project, maybe they're doing something and it's in conjunction with us. And, then we're not outlaying all sorts of money, but we're engaging in social community activity, but we're also engaging the assistance of the very sort of folks we intend to support.
Sure. I think it's entirely possible. And Steve in the meeting had a great idea. He said, how about internships?
Right, that's where I'm going.
Yeah. I want to talk about that a bit, Steve.
Well, I mean, we threw out the idea that it would be important for students to understand that there's a housing crisis and perhaps through an internship, maybe the student attends these meetings. They may do research for us, but just engage students in the idea that this is what affordable housing is. This is what workforce houses and sort of just become introduced to the subject. And Sue was she would be favorably inclined to hear a proposal from us.
So open discussion. We have a swinging chance at the grant, but we don't have to accept it. And we need to, I think, refine our goals, perhaps, combine them, refine them, come up with an order we would go after. So it's open discussion.
I have a question. Tonight, the word deficit was thrown around so much. How do we figure out what our deficit is as of this year? I would be really curious to see what, I don't even know how you go about finding it out. Everybody talks about it, but finding out a starting base number of we are already in need of X number of single family, single apartments, whatever. The breakdown was 4 different types of housing.
That's a good point. To my understanding, we need to do some inventories of what we have as to housing. How many buildings have 2 units? How many have 4 units? How many ADUs? How many apartment units? How many rentals? How many? And we also, this book, this regional housing needs assessment book is a real gold mine, but it doesn't all necessarily relate to New London. It's regional. And you heard that what Hanover's doing is they've hired somebody to say, okay, tell us what's in Hanover. Go into this book and mine it. And I think that's what we would need.
That was the confusion to me until I began to realize that we were not discussing. We were discussing Merrimack County and the Upper Valleys region, which Merrimack is such a small part of the Upper Valley Commission's group. So anyway, food for thought on how to go about
Yeah.
getting the deficit information.
Yeah.
I'll think
yeah.
about it a little bit more.
Yeah. And that's why they call it regional housing needs assessment. Absolutely.
I think it would make the people of New London understand better if we came up with a current deficit idea. Not concrete, but these are the kind of housing things that we feel we do need, that we don't have. So now that we think we might need these, let's talk about where we might put them. Because that's the biggest concern. Everybody doesn't want it in their backyard unless they know what it's going to be.
I would also point out the beauty of all the additional surveys we were able to get from New London employers and also residents. There's a big part of that data that came from New London that's in this book. So we're not just mining vagueness. We can get some good stuff.
One thing, if I may, bring up, we kind of touched on it on here a little bit, but, and maybe this is a snippet of kind of how to get that, or a metric that can be looked at, is the seller's market or the absorption rate. So how much inventory do you have available for sale? And how long is that staying on the market for? Kind of lends itself. We did have it in there, the seller's market kind of analysis in there. And so an absorption rate of 6 months is accepted as a healthy balance. So again, that I think it kind of plays into a little bit of that metric that you're looking for, like what the deficit is, right? So 6 months absorption rate is healthy in the market. But right now we are at 0.8 months. So that's pretty quick turnover, if you will. So I don't know if that helps.
Doesn't understand the math or the calculation. Does everybody understand it? And I'm the only one that, you just
Which
said 6 months absorption. Right now we're
Yeah.
at 0.5. I
Yeah.
really don't get that.
So
So
how long, Marilyn, you might be able to answer this too, I'm not sure, but like the absorption rate, like how long, means the rate homes sell at a given period or the number of months for current inventory to sell. So how long does it
If
take
nothing
on the
else came
market?
on the market in that time period, how long would it take to
Take sell.
exhaust what's currently on the market, right?
The week that there were 3 listings in New London, and the average time on the market was 33 days. So what does that mean?
Yeah.
well, that's what I mean. I don't.
Less than a
are you
month, less than
you're
a month
saying that
absorption.
In less than
right?
a month, those 3 things would be gone. We would have nothing.
And there have been days and weeks that we've had
Nothing.
0. Yeah,
Mhm.
definitely.
So how does that 6-month thing play into
So
it?
6 months, how much inventory you have available to sell in your town, kind of a 6 months absorption rate,
If we had,
current inventory to sell. So like, how much do you have? And then what's the turnover? Some might sell sooner, right? Some of the,
I mean, are you
location.
saying, okay, from January to June, that's 6 months, how much did you have? I mean, are you going back? Are you going forward? Where do you
It's n-
start the calculation and how are you getting there? Because wouldn't we
kind
want to
of a-
tell people, well, we had,
yeah,
Oh, definitely. And I think you don't necessarily include January, February.
no, of
March.
course not. I
Yeah.
just took it as,
yeah.
If you start April 1st, like the fools do, and we go a 6-month window. I think it would be interesting to look at that. I think it would be interesting to throw out the high-end sales. They're not relevant.
right.
They're very relevant, but
Which ones aren't high end?
right, but again, I think that would help us drill down a little bit closer to what our needs might be.
But I think a short absorption rate isn't good for workforce housing
No,
stock.
Right.
I
right.
mean, prices are just through the roof because of that.
Right. In my simple mind, I think of it as a supply and demand curve that we all learned in our economics 101. So if you have a supply that starts to dwindle and the demand remains the same, then the price goes up, the curves cross and the price goes up. Think of it like a farm stand. If the farmer is not able to produce enough fruit at the farm stand, eventually there'll be the same demand and the price will go up because there are more people trying to buy the limited number of oranges that they used to buy, or apples, or whatever it is.
strawberry.
And strawberries, blueberries. But to the point of workforce housing and the diversity of housing, which is important, is that if you choke down the availability, you also choke down the types of housing that are available. So to have a quantity, an inventory that it would be absorbed in a 6-month period as stable, it means there are a number of different options of housing at different prices.
Which
But
we don't
if,
have.
which we don't have because our absorption is a very, very different number, or inventory is a very different number. Is that helpful?
Just a thought. I know we need an inventory. I think we all understand that. But my impression was what we were trying to do was to bring in a consultant or two to begin that inventory and then build that base and go from there. All right, is that, I know it's also dependent upon getting the grant as well. But that may be something that we may require of them and expect of them to do as a beginning point.
Yeah, that's really doing the inventory we talked about and mapping it out and understanding what the numbers are and then seeing where it exists geographically. That was that mapping component. It's a good starting point. And that's, I think, what the matrix tries to accomplish.
And just one point I was going to make is, it may seem like the high end market doesn't matter, but I think it does because we have buyers ready to buy in the high end market. And when there are not opportunities for them to purchase, they end up purchasing houses that are maybe below what they would typically look at. And then they either tear them down and rebuild something that no longer fills that void, or they renovate to the point that they're no longer a sort of median property. So we do want to make sure that there's higher end because we have a lot of people who can afford it.
Okay, so let's go back to whoever's going to develop this inventory. I believe that's where we need to start. I just believe we need to be at that point and go from there, because again, in order for me to be comfortable selling housing to New London and lots being developed, I think it needs to be more constructive on our part to give direction to whether it's townhouses or Harry Snow's default into the four units per those large buildings that were, that was like a windfall for the town. Trust me, because it's being used, those turn over somewhat more regularly than any other housing I'm aware of. People are just not so much lately. Okay, I'll take that back.
Cottage Lane.
If you've got someplace to live, unless you have to move, those are awesome apartments.
are.
And if one comes available, they'll get 50 inquiries. I mean, it's crazy.
I'm moving there soon.
I mean, they're lovely and it's too bad they didn't build 10 more of them.
I agree.
So interpreting the discussion, just trying to move things and consolidate ideas. Really in the first part of the purpose, it says New London existing conditions. An inventory would be an important part of that, probably part of the mapping study. What do we have? Existing types, densities, and opportunities. That sound right? What would be next?
Just to make sure Ann and I are talking about the right thing over here, so that we really can't go anywhere until we know what we've got. And that's where we start.
And I think that actually, if you were thinking about an internship of some sort, when the sewer commission went, or the public works director wanted to do depths of manholes, they got some of the students to work on that too. It was the environmental group, but they were there measuring manholes and seeing our gold flow to Sunapee.
I mean, the kids have done tons of stuff, for different organizations. They just need to have a clear outline of what's expected and how and which course description it fits into and.
Right.
And they've loved doing it and Kobe's appreciated the opportunity. And the price is right.
Steve, you're puzzled. What are you thinking?
Well, just on another. I'm stuck at 81 units from the study. And Twin Pines is going to build 60. So in my mind, we've taken care of the next 2 to 3 years of needs.
But we're missing the part that we.
Well, but I mean, 60 units are going to come online over the next couple of years. But the barrier that I keep on stumbling over, or bumping into is water. And no matter what we do, if we don't have a source of water, it's fruitless. So somewhere the water precinct has to be in our needs and a priority. And so how do we engage them formally in working with developing housing? Because right now we can't put a 10-unit development online. I don't think.
It would have to be on a
In the
well.
precinct.
It would have to be on a community well, probably.
It would have to be a community or, outside the precinct.
Yeah.
But that runs contra to the ideal spot for workforce housing is near the place for employment. If we don't have public transport, it's endless. But to me, it's the elephant in the room is the infrastructure for this town. And Kim, we're getting a grant, I think.
Hopefully.
To replace the water main.
Oh, yes.
To repair, to do something. And it's what, $500,000? Well, is that the best use when the capacity is, we don't have the capacity to add new housing?
Yeah, they've had a lot of breaks on that line, Steve, so they have to replace it.
Oh, they have to.
Oh, they absolutely have to.
Absolutely.
They've had the last couple of years, 3 or 4 on Main Street, so.
Steve, just I personally recognize that as being a gatekeeper for development of housing in our town, and I've been attending every one of the precinct meetings. They have a draft report from the engineers highlighting a number of different opportunities for enhancing the amount of water that they need. And the numbers are pretty substantial. Last night, we heard numbers from Continuum at the ZBA meeting that they need 25,000 gallons per day for their project. And and also, since I've been sitting in on the precinct meetings, they don't have anything near that in their existing well system. The challenge that the water precinct commissioners recognize is that's going to take a lot of capital. Any of the solutions is going to take money, but that's what water precincts and infrastructure systems do. It's what utilities do. They float bonds, they build infrastructure, and that allows for proper economic development in my simple mind. So how do we deal with water? I don't think it can cause us to stop in our tracks. That's my suggestion, that we continue to highlight it as being a very, very key issue in housing. But since we can't affect it very much, except to maintain visibility of that being an issue, I'd suggest we keep our feet moving and keep raising that flag.
Yeah, all I'm suggesting is that it doesn't show up in any of our goals. And I think it ought to be elevated and memorialized as part of our goals. And whether that's a representative from this commission attending the precinct formally, or having a member, come in and report to us, but somehow put some formality to all the discussions.
Steve, I agree. I think it's a problem. It's got to be, even though we can't directly impact it, it's got to be addressed as being a problem.
If
We
it's
can talk
not,
about it all we
becomes a
want, but
barricade.
So I don't know
It's a
where
big
we would,
area.
where we would put it.
Yeah.
What are the problems and trends or problems?
When you think about having, adding 81 units, when we don't know what our deficit is, let's say, let's not even say anything, but the 81 units, let's just say units. The thought of having to do those as either ADUs or small townhouses scattered throughout the town, I'm not sure that that's compatible with the character of the town at all. So I agree, the water has to be addressed because a lot of our, probably a lot of our individual lots couldn't sustain 4 to 6 units on them, either septic or water,
It could or could not,
could not.
could not.
I mean, I don't know how many people are on a well here, but we had to go quite a distance to get our water, and we're right by Pleasant Lake.
Peter, just a question.
Sure.
Since you had the opportunity to attend those meetings at the precinct. And they have some things that they have to take care of almost immediately that's on their agenda. Was there a discussion about where they will be in 5 years? Do they have a long-range plan? Is anything there? Or are we just, they're working on only the immediacy of the problem?
Well, I've raised that in a public hearing. I think it was a selectmen's meeting, or maybe it was planning board. I suggested that really it's not there has been some representation of the inability to get more water, simply to say, we're not sure we can. And my point of view was, it's not, can you find more water? It's what's it going to cost to find more water?
How do you
Because
do it?
how do you do it?
Yeah.
And you got to look at all the opportunities. You have to put them in a priority. You rank them by cost and location and feasibility, and then pick the best one and go after it. And it's not a question of can you, but how you're going to get it done. And I made that point publicly, and I think it was heard. The water precinct, I think it's fair to say, has sped up their schedule. Originally, they said the study was going to be done in September, and they've already got a draft and they're working on it. So I think it's important for the commission and for the select board and for the planning board, everybody to keep pressure that this needs to be addressed. It's part of the vitality of our community.
So I want to back up just for a minute. I agree that water is an issue, and I think it obviously needs to be added in as one of the problems, and that's related to infrastructure for the town of New London. But going back, I think as we identify, what is the current housing stock, I just want to continue to emphasize, we're talking across a continuum. Although that's the name of the developer, but as we talk about starter homes, workforce housing, senior housing, and so forth, it's not just one size fits all. And it was never meant that the building on Percenti property, we're all done. We've addressed, workforce housing. That was never, that was the intention. So I think two things need to happen. One is to understand more deeply what that current housing continuum stock looks like, and then somehow bring that together with what's the gap in terms of demand. What are we talking about in terms of potentially people who need starter homes? What are we talking about in terms of people who need rentals and long-term rentals? And any of those other kinds of things. And I'm not exactly sure how we get at that. But I think that's an important piece.
So the inventory or the study would be sure to address inventory on the basis of type.
Right.
And
Which,
what's our need by type.
as I understand it, the 81 was across the continuum. It wasn't just single family residences or whatever else.
Right.
Exactly.
It's units,
Right.
and it is allocated across rentals and ownership and by percentage of AMI. Again, this is an allocation that's done on a regional basis, and they list New London. So, but it doesn't really mine the information and the real data that should be done in our town.
Right. And somehow that algorithm needs to be drilled down so that it addresses that. And hopefully someone far smarter than I has the wherewithal to do that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because I think that goes to the explanation that we need to feed back to the town taxpayers relative to what is it that we're trying to do here?
Speaking of the town taxpayers, I have a feeling that the tax, what is that program? Tax maps, no, not the reassessment, but the tax maps, the tax cards, all that stuff. That program is pretty able to, in other words, if you know what you're doing in that program, you can probably find out how many 4-bedroom homes there are in New London, right? I don't know how to use it that way, but
You can't find out.
I mean, no, that's pretty tiny,
You,
but
you can,
you can
I've
find out a
done,
lot of
I've
stuff.
done quite a bit of stuff on that.
And I'm not usually searching it that way,
And
but
it's not very hard. Might be part of our cost to be able to have them write a program that could more easily give us some of the information, because they've done it for definitely the water and the sewer, so that we can isolate who's on water and who's on sewer in those cards. So I'm sure we can drill down on 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 1-bedroom. The ADUs are sketchy with this, but they're still,
They've started adding an ADU field, so the data will get better there.
Yeah, and I've mentioned before, I reiterate, this fellow, David Cornell, is somebody that years ago, in my talking with Norm Benesh, had suggested he's very good at mining data from the assessor's GIS. And he goes in, understands all the different categories and can query them the right way. So that's on the list of possibilities. Yeah.
I mean, that's just one, I mean, as opposed to people walking around neighborhoods or whatever. I mean, we've got this humongous database. And if you can, write a program to search certain.
yeah, you might have to
things,
refine some of the program, but
Yeah,
it's doable.
I would think so. I mean, and it makes it doable instead of.
What would be next to? I'm not looking at you. I just happen to be turning this way, turning both ways.
What would be what?
What would be next to tackle on this list of, we start out sort of who are we, and we're looking at inventory and product type, and where you look at that second bullet point, mapping of existing types, densities, opportunities. When you, in my mind, when you talk to somebody like David Cornell, and I have several times, you said, well, can you send me a list of things you're thinking about? And I haven't followed up with him because it wasn't really fruitful, but you could say, well, we're thinking about ADUs, and in particular detached ADUs. How many unoccupied detached buildings do we have in our town? How many people have garages that could have a second floor turned into an ADU? And I don't know if that information is available on the assessor's database, but we'll do our best to pull what we can. So you kind of use some of these goals to ask the questions in the queries in the programs that you write to look at that database. So that's one perspective. I put down here town historic perspective, sort of learning from the past of how the town has grown to understand why the different types are where they are. And once you understand a bit about the past, maybe that guides you better as to where they should go in the future. Because the point's well taken. If we know we need more than 81 units. We know that in our hearts. But if Twin Pines were to be built today, that's 60 of them, but it's only one product type. So that was Nancy's point. So, okay, what other types would be considered? Would ADUs fit? Maybe it's 4 families, garden style or townhouse, or do we have any? How many townhouses do we have in town? That's sort of ties it with the inventory, but history being a guide on what could go in the future. Does that seem important?
I gotta ask the question, Peter. In reviewing all the material, and I apologize for not being with you over the last couple of meetings. The multiple page presentation that laid out a series of town meetings similar to what we did last year
Mhm.
seemed to address all of the things that you're raising with your one pager. And am I wrong in understanding that that's what would be supported by the grant that we've now been told we probably are going to get?
If we are funded, if we get it and we are funded, we could do
Yeah.
those things.
Then,
But I want to make sure everybody wants to do them. And in what order do we do them? We've, in my mind, with all due respect to our busy lives, in the beginning of March, we had a vote on the good work that we did. And it's been more than 4.5 months since then, and we haven't even decided where we're going to go. So,
yeah, I guess I read this as a roadmap for where we're going and how we're getting there.
It was
a
suggestion.
just a suggestion.
Okay.
We need to buy into it. You need to tell me, does this make sense?
Well, I'm prepared to support it.
Okay. That's why I thought it'd be helpful if we go through it and cull it out and decide, are there any that seem like they're not good ideas or?
Peter, I have a question. And under the existing conditions, define rural planning study, rural town planning study.
Well, I put that in there because
It seems like we're going back to the past again. We're going to use that model, rural.
well, it's perhaps my ignorance on how you describe the nature of the town. It's not suburban.
No.
It certainly isn't urban. And I talked to an old friend of mine who's an amazing urban planner with down in Boston, a delightful guy. And so I may be in my overreaction to try to describe New London as rural, but I didn't know how to describe it otherwise. And there is, by the way, a town planner that I've come across as an amazing resource. He used to be a town planner for the city of Burlington in Vermont. His name is David White. And he has retired from there. And he's now working, believe it or not, the world is small. He's working in a town of Jericho, Vermont, doing a master plan in partnership with Steve Whitman. And I've got triangulation on 2 resources that I've contacted from my old career days down in Boston, who both people have named him as somebody who'd be great for our town to work with. And
How's he labeling, what's he labeling Jericho as? Rural?
I don't know, and I haven't done a lot of studies, but with two people giving me one source, that's somebody I'd like to get to know better.
I think that it's hard to say where you go next until you know where you're starting from. Does that make sense? So after we do the existing conditions, then wouldn't we look at the problems and trends and then, I mean, at what point are we bringing it out to the public, and what are we bringing, what for? In other words, I don't think we just have public meetings just for the sake of public meetings. I think, okay, here's what we found, here we see the problems are. And here's some possible solutions. Maybe those are 2 different meetings or whatever, but I don't think we rush to the meeting before we even know what we've got. What are we gonna, we don't even know what we have. Right? I have no idea.
So if we put potential goals more at the end of this instead of the beginning, because those are our
Yeah.
goals,
Exactly.
but when they need to be at the below the mapping and the trending and the history and all of that. I don't know what kind of housing, and I certainly have been around long enough. Some other people here have been in town to know that the expansion sort of occurred because it was the natural way to go. It gravitated towards 89 and left the nucleus of New London intact, the older buildings, et cetera, et cetera. But beyond that, lucky developers. That's all I can say. Rink Man, Highland Ridge, all lucky. They had the foresight because they came from Connecticut or Massachusetts. They'd seen these things work and they put them in place. I mean, Rink Man putting Slope and Shore together is amazing to me.
Nolan Hilltop.
Oh, the Hilltop.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's it truly, thank goodness we have them.
My purpose in putting the goals first was that when we start to look at who we are and we query the database, for example, of the GIS system at the assessor's office, it's helpful to have a little bit of a sense of how to mine that information. And some of these goals, will be woven in at different stages. For example, meeting the housing needs of large employers. That could be part of our looking at what the demand is and what are the problems and trends. So that would be in kind of the second bullet point of the purpose. So I hear what you're saying. They're kind of woven into the whole matrix, if you will.
And maybe that's what we do is weave them in.
Yeah, and I agree with Ann. I mean, I think, again, we don't know what we know until we know what we know.
Mhm.
And then we can't. I mean, sure, these may be some of the goals, but, learn what we've got. What do we see as problems? What do those potential problems lead to us thinking about as potential goals to help fix the problems? And, we have some ideas about what we should be looking for, but I kind of like to see the goals as, okay, we've studied this all and now here's what it's led us to think we should do. And this is when we have something to talk to people about and really, not that we can't talk to them along the way, but
Mhm.
I don't know. They aren't cast in stone anyway. I mean, this is just because if we have them up front, we want to leave it open for other things that we don't want to always be focusing on what's up here too, on those goals, because we never know what we're going to find if we are just looking.
Well, that fits my general interest in approaching this is that if we try to jam solutions down anybody's throat, including our own, we're going to get misguided and the community won't absorb it either. They won't support it. But if we study and in a didactic way, draw out conclusions and solutions that the community helps us come to, then we're a lot better shape. It may be that we get no regulatory change done this year. I'm very comfortable with that. We made big strides before. We know how to do it now, but we need to study a lot more to get there.
Well, and I think the other parallel with this is the water, because we need to look at this as we go along, finding solutions. Is there water or is there not water? Because that's going to control a whole lot of what we can put where. No two ways about it. Steep slopes, wetlands.
And I do think zoning is so important in the decisions you make in this, that you don't want to rush to judgment in any way, just because it looks like the solution at the time. I mean, New London zoning started in the 50s, one of the first in the state, I think. And, it's come along all right. It is what it is because of those early forethinkers that worked at it and got people to agree to it. Some kicking and screaming probably, but
And there were only so many landowners. We have divided and conquered, and there's a whole lot more landowners now than there was when all of this started. A lot of them have lost their lands.
So the notion of putting the goals down at the bottom or maybe on another page is a very good one. That sounds great. Does the flow of the purpose seem to make sense? Because that's really how the grant was put together, was start out with an analysis of who we are, understand the problems and trends, modify the goals a bit as we go, let the solutions surface a bit. Where is the problem occurring? Because those are questions that are specific to geography, and then solutions and opportunities. And as we get closer and closer to the end, we'll be defining those goals. So the notion of creating a detached ADU regulation change or a new regulation is something that could evolve out of this. And we know that's something the planning board would like to see and the select board would like to see. But in our opinions, if we don't think the community is not ready for it, then we're not going to recommend it.
How about if the purpose was, sorry, I didn't raise my hand. Or if it were to listen, learn, inform. That's just a very small tweak. The purpose to listen, learn, inform, and guide decisions.
Okay,
Because we're gonna have to listen to a lot of stuff
Yep.
before we, and then we're gonna learn a lot of stuff.
Yep.
Then we're gonna be informing other people about it and hopefully making some kind of impact on decisions.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when the decision was made to bring 89 the way it is coming now. And that was, the people in New London were instrumental in bringing it through New London. It was not originally scheduled to come here, and whoever did it was brilliant in helping this community be what it is.
somebody told me the story about a bit of that, and that is we're one of the few towns that has 2 exits on 89.
Yeah, it's true.
It does run through our town, or some of our towns on the other side of it.
Well, it's just like the opposite happened in Franklin, when the town of Franklin voted not to have 93 swing through there, and that was their death knell.
And it was, one of the sites was over in that area.
Absolutely.
So
There's no
mean,
parallel route
I'd
through.
like to consider that this group is somehow going to make that future, just help make those future decisions that were made 50 years ago or more for 89.
Well, it's 7:45, and I promised to try and keep them to an hour and a half. It was really helpful to understand what the Regional Planning Commission is thinking about our housing needs assessment, and this is big steps forward. So are there any other quick thoughts we should tag on here before we conclude?
One thing.
I'm just sitting here. So 89 comes through and, New London takes off, and everybody just get their houses assessed, and everybody's valuations are up another 50%. So why would any developer want to build an affordable home, workforce housing, Section 8 housing for seniors, when they can put up a 3-family house and get $900,000 for it? I mean, I think we're a victim of our own success. And a lot of people don't perceive there's a problem. Because everybody here who owns a house can sell it for a lot more than what it's assessed for. So, there's a real, I guess it's a publicity campaign or educational campaign, but I don't know how you fight this success that we're having relative to overpriced housing.
I think that what we have to go back to is that people have to understand that if we don't have, the college, the hospital, the shopping, the people that come to your house when you have your knee redone, if we don't have those people, the whole entire character of this town will change. And people just think, oh no, it'll all be the same. It's just going to be the same. But that's not the case. And if they can't live somewhere at least close, they're not going to keep coming here. And I think that's the thing that has to be sold. And when I went to that meeting at the Baptist church and VNA spoke, Tom Mannion was there. I mean, they made incredibly compelling arguments and they're saying that what people don't understand is they're going to call us up and say, hey, can you have somebody scheduled to come in once a week or whatever? And they're going to say, no, we don't have the helpers, the work. It's not so much, it's even, we see it in the restaurants, of course, but it's the other basic stuff that's the guys packing bags at Hannaford's, I mean, it.
But I think Steve's right. And I think that part of that messaging, because I think the attitude is They can live in Newbury. They can live in Springfield.
Yeah.
We don't need to do anything in New London. I mean, somehow the messaging has to be turned around that we need to do our fair share. And what is New London's fair share, which goes back to identifying what we currently have, what the demand is, so on and so forth. So all of that information, I think, is critically important.
And Nancy, we've talked in the past about that it's not just a New London problem,
Yeah.
and that we touch on several, other towns, and
Right.
there's a way to be able to do some of this together, hopefully.
Well, that's what the navigator's for.
But I think that's what Nancy's saying is somehow, I think that language has to find its way into our goals and into, how do we get that messaging out? And, this is the choir, we're preaching to the choir. But there's not a lot of public input, so I mean. So it's the how, and somehow weave that into a strategic plan, into a bullet point. Maybe there's a committee that's formed, but I think the knowledge and talking to those folks who are directly affected by the lack of housing.
Maybe they're the ones that are on the panel next time.
Well, yeah, or representing,
It's not the people that want to
This
hire
committee.
them, but the people that are trying to be hired.
yeah.
I also went to that, the meeting, it was the Communities and Consequences movie that was put on, that you're referring to, Marilyn, that was very moving.
Yeah.
Including
Great job.
was it a nurse that spoke up
Yeah.
and told her personal story? She didn't belabor it. She wasn't weeping, but she was just telling her story about how tough it was to find a place to live. So,
Well,
so
that's another big need, short-term housing for nurses, for therapists and folks like that. And that's where the ADUs become a big play.
right. To your point, Steve, just quickly, the notion of greenfield development of housing units in this environment right now is pretty tough.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty tough. And we tried to create an incentive by tweaking the workforce housing bylaw to give a greater density.
Yeah.
More additional market rate units if you build the ones that maybe break even at best. So hopefully that will start to create, but one concept that might start to create infill housing as opposed to greenfield in one location is ADUs, detached ADUs, taking advantage of the fact that as people get older, they don't need as much square footage. And the younger population doesn't need big units at first in the continuum. And there's a balance you can make by taking some of the older folks' housing that's too big for them and making it transferable into housing for those who are younger and need smaller housing. So, but greenfield, it's tough. I get that. And that's why when we have Twin Pines and Continuum and those sorts of folks wanting to do development in town, we need to be cheerleaders. So. Renee?
Yeah, so I was gonna touch on real quick. Yeah, I think it's also the fabric of care that kind of Olivia touched on too. Like, how do you get that message of the care is needed? Like, we want to be a viable community and a viable town and a viable area. And how do you keep the viability alive? And going back to some of the other points real quick was, so I'm sitting here listening and seeing how I can help out and add capacity as well. The town. I know Adam's very busy. I know the town office is very busy. Some of the things I heard was, maybe the assessing data. I'd be happy to help out with the assessing office and gathering some of that data with them and collecting it and bringing it back to you guys if you'd like. I can certainly lend a hand there. And then also with the other towns, I know Peter mentioned the last meeting was trying to get kind of like all the community towns, Wilmot and Newbury as well, into a room and for conversation to kind of have that kind of, we're in this together. We are in that LMA zone that was mentioned, and so how do we all kind of look at this and tackle it together? So I'm going to be talking with Wilmot tomorrow night and hopefully in the next few weeks trying to get on a date that we can kind of all sit get into a room and have a conversation. and maybe potentially keep that going. Maybe all three towns meet bi-monthly and just kind of have a check-in chat or see how things are going. So that's certainly on my radar. And then the third thing real quick was something that's come out. So community response, right? Getting that survey data, getting some of that in a couple of other towns. Actually, Wilmette, it's, a little more rural. And so how do you get that information data? One of the ideas outreach that I'm going to be doing, and I'd love to do in New London as well. And if you guys have any questions that you or want specifically asked, but I would love to do what I call a dump day. So how do you get those other voices heard? How do you find out what people want? And how do I reach them? So everyone kind of has to go to the dump eventually, right? You got to hit the transfer station, drop off your stuff, your yard work. So my plan is to set up a table, have some stuff there, have some chats with folks, and kind of just on foot get some of that feedback from community residents and people who live here day in, day out and are doing the hard work. What's that?
Thank you. Those are good ideas. We'll
So,
keep that in mind.
If you have anything. shoot me
For
an
the, just
email.
quickly for the combined meeting with the towns, I'd want to make sure the agenda was well mapped out. Because that can be a lot of time arm waving, and so we want to map that out pretty carefully. Any other thoughts, questions?
Yeah, Peter.
Yeah.
My impression is when we looked at the goals originally, the first two had to do with the ADUs. We just discussed it again. These were talked about with the boards, so forth. Everyone was in total support. So we shouldn't drop the ball, at least on getting something maybe accomplished this year for the next round, for next March, get it in place. But we should continue maybe working along that line, getting some of the tweaking done, getting things fixed up so that next year they're all in place. That could be opening a door. The biggest door, no, but it could open some doors. We get us going in some direction until we maybe come along later with the consultants and all the meetings and all the answers we finally get. And maybe that'll work out. But I don't know if we should let's just put it off to the side here. I think we shouldn't drop the ball on this one.
Thoughts? Yeah, please. What do you think?
I think that's a valid point. I think if we can collect some data, then we can sell also the ADU on the limited data that we might have collected by the time it needs to go into a town warrant to suggest some changes to the ADU regulations. I don't know. And I don't know how ready people are. I don't know. I don't have my finger on that pulse just yet. I'll work on it. Because I think there's so many, and I'm going to be very honest, I think there's a whole lot of ADUs out there that are not registered with the town. End of message. They've just gone ahead and done it. And nobody's going to let any assessor in their door that has done it with no consents signed or after the fact fine or whatever. But there certainly is popping up for traveling personnel or temporary, and maybe they're being billed as VRBOs, but they're long-term ones. They're not true, just weekly or every 2-week turnovers.
Anybody else? How do you feel about it? All right.
I think it clearly came up in all the discussions. And I think part of it is a need to be able to answer questions of people who may be coming in and asking about what to do, how they do them. And I get that. I never meant that they should get shoved aside, but they're a possible goal to get some regulations about it, but I don't know enough yet.
It's part of our due diligence.
Okay.
The Board of Selectmen were clear that they asked for that. Along with rental units. It wasn't just ADUs attached or detached, it was rental. What does our rental market currently look like? Not much.
Okay. Right, good. Any other thoughts? I'm sorry it's going on so long, but we go level on the ground. And do I get the sense that we're going to keep pushing and working on this grant? We have some monies to work with and
Yes, I think so. And Peter, kudos to you for all of the time and energy that you put into writing that grant initially and for the work that you need to do. So
well, thank
thank you very much.
I have to tell you, I feel like a fish out of water writing grants. That's just, I'm just a business guy, but thank you.
The secret to writing grants is you tell them what they want to hear.
So next meetings, we need to keep moving pretty quickly. So I would had on the schedule August 2nd. We've talked about that before. Does that look acceptable? August 2nd here. I'll ask him if we can, I think we locked up that room. And the new one would be August 23rd. I'm end of September, I'm going to be disappearing for a couple of weeks. September and into October. So I'm trying to keep an eye on when I'm not going to be useful. But August 23rd sound good? If you would keep that on your calendars. A motion to adjourn, do I hear? So moved in a second. Second, all in favor, aye. Thank you very much.